Dr. Theodore Finch had delivered exactly 347 babies in his 12 years of practice, and not once had he confused a patient's identity. Until the morning, Grusha stumbled through his door with blood trailing down her legs and terror carved into her green features. The confusion began with Mrs. Patterson, the baker's wife who'd been expected any day now. Theodore had seen her just yesterday waddling past his window, her belly impossibly round beneath her apron. When someone knocked frantically at dawn, he'd assumed labor had started and called out for her to enter while he scrubbed his hands. The door opened. Heavy footsteps crossed his examination room. By the time he turned around, his mind had already committed to the expectation. "Right on time, Mrs. Patterson," he said warmly, gesturing to the examination table without looking up as he dried his hands. "Let's get you comfortable and see how far along you are." The silence that followed should have alerted him. Instead, he attributed it to labor pains and moved to help his patient onto the table. His hands found a muscular arm, far more solid than he remembered, but pregnancy changed bodies in unexpected ways. He guided her up, noting absently that she seemed taller. "Deep breaths now," Theodore murmured, finally turning his full attention to his patient, green skin. Tusks, pointed ears, yellow-gold eyes wide with pain and something that looked like desperate hope, not Mrs. Patterson. An orc woman, heavily pregnant, bleeding, and now lying on his examination table. Theodore's medical training overrode his shock. The blood concerned him far more than the species of his patient. "How long have you been bleeding?" he asked, moving immediately to examine her. She flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. "Since yesterday," she managed through gritted teeth. Her accent was thick, rolling the words in a way that suggested the common tongue wasn't native to her. "I walked through the night to reach town." "From where?" Theodore kept his voice calm as he assessed her. The bleeding seemed to be slowing, which was good. Her pulse was rapid but strong. "The foothills. 3 hours north." She'd walked 3 hours in active labor, alone, bleeding. Theodore felt his chest tighten with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you in pain now?" "Yes." No elaboration, just that single word forced between her tusks. He worked quickly, checking the baby's position, listening for the heartbeat. Strong and steady. Relief washed through him. "Your baby is fine. You're fine. The bleeding was likely just your body preparing for labor. You're close now, very close." Her entire body seemed to sag with relief. "The baby lives, very much so. Strong heartbeat. Good position." Theodore met her eyes, those strange golden eyes that held such raw vulnerability. "You're going to be a mother soon, Mrs. Patterson." He said it without thinking, his mind still caught in the expectation from before she'd entered. The name simply slipped out, carried by habit and assumption. Grusha went very still. Her mouth opened, tusk catching her lower lip, then closed. She stared at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Confusion, perhaps, or disbelief, but not correction. "I'll need you to stay here," Theodore continued, oblivious to the strange moment that had just passed. "Labor could progress quickly now, and I don't want you alone when it does. My wife passed 2 years ago, so there's no one else in the house. I hope that's acceptable." Another long silence. Then quietly, "Yes, good. Let me get you something for the pain and some water. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning." Theodore made a disapproving sound. "I'll bring food as well. You need your strength." He left her there, still processing the unexpected patient, an orc. In his examination room, about to give birth. It should have concerned him more than it did, but Theodore had long ago decided that suffering was suffering regardless of who experienced it, and help was help regardless of who received it. Besides, she'd come to him. Walked 3 hours alone and bleeding because she'd heard, somehow, that there was a doctor in Millbrook who might help her. He returned with broth, bread, and willow bark tea. She accepted it all with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from pain or exhaustion or fear, he couldn't tell. "Probably all three, Mrs. Patterson," he said gently, and again she flinched at the name but didn't correct him. "Where is your husband? Should I send for him?" Her face closed off completely. "Dead. I'm sorry." Theodore had seen that look before, that particular shade of grief mixed with something harder. Recently, 6 months ago. So she'd been pregnant when it happened, or close to it. Theodore felt a pang of sympathy for this strange green woman with her tusks and her golden eyes and her dead husband. Family nearby who should be notified. No family. She said it with finality that discouraged further questions. Theodore nodded, accepting this. Plenty of people came to frontier towns like Millbrook to escape their pasts or start fresh. If she wanted privacy, he'd give it to her. "Then it's just us. Drink the tea. Rest if you can. I'll be right here." The hours that followed established a pattern that would define everything to come. Theodore treated her exactly as he would have treated any patient, with gentle professionalism and calm competence. He checked on her regularly, noting the progression of labor, offering encouragement and pain relief. He called her Mrs. Patterson without thinking, and each time she opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again and simply nodded. By afternoon, her contractions had intensified. Theodore helped her through them, letting her grip his hands with strength that would have broken bones if she'd fully released her control. He murmured encouragement, wiped her forehead, and marveled at her stoicism. She barely made a sound beyond harsh breathing. "You can scream if you need to," he told her during one particularly harsh contraction. "No one will judge you for it." "Orcs don't scream in labor," she panted. "It attracts predators." The casual mention of her species startled him. He'd been so focused on the medicine that he'd almost forgotten. Almost. "You're not in the wild anymore," he said gently. "You're safe here." Her eyes met his, searching for something. "Am I?" "Yes." He said it with complete certainty, and something in his tone must have convinced her because her shoulders dropped slightly, tension easing. "Theodore," she said, testing his name. "You are the doctor." "I am. Theodore Finch at your service." He smiled. "Though you can call me Theo if you'd prefer, Mrs. Patterson." Again, that strange hesitation. Then, "Grusha." "I'm sorry, my name, Grusha, not." She trailed off, seeming to struggle with something internal. Theodore felt heat rise to his cheeks. Of course, he'd been calling her Mrs. Patterson all day, and she'd been too polite, or perhaps too desperate for his help, to correct him. "I apologize. I don't know why I assumed." "Well, I was expecting Mrs. Patterson this morning, and somehow the idea just stuck. Grusha, that's a beautiful name." She made a sound that might have been a laugh if not filtered through pain. "It means pear in my clan tongue. Still beautiful." He squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for telling me." But even after that exchange, something strange happened. Within an hour, he called her Mrs. Patterson again, the name simply falling from his lips as he helped her through a contraction. And once more, she didn't correct him. She just gripped his hands and breathed through the pain and let him call her whatever he wanted. The baby came as the sun set, painting the examination room in shades of amber and gold. Theodore had delivered hundreds of babies, but he'd never delivered one quite like this. The infant emerged with a lusty cry, skin pale green, tiny tusks already visible as small bumps along her gums. "A daughter." "A girl," Theodore announced, his voice thick with the emotion that always accompanied new life. "You have a daughter, Grusha." But Grusha wasn't looking at the baby. She was looking at him, her golden eyes swimming with tears. "She's alive, healthy, perfect." He quickly cleaned the infant and wrapped her in soft cloth before placing her on Grusha's chest. Absolutely perfect. The sound Grusha made then was nothing Theodore could describe. Relief and love and grief all tangled together. She cradled her daughter with hands that shook, tusks catching the lamplight as she bent to breathe in the baby's scent. "Zara," she whispered. "Her name is Zara." Theodore busied himself with the afterbirth and cleaning, giving them privacy for those first precious moments. When he finally finished and looked up, he found Grusha watching him with an expression he couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said softly. "You saved us both. Just doing my job." But they both knew it was more than that. He could have turned her away. Many would have. An orc alone, desperate. It would have been easy to close the door, to say he couldn't help, to direct her elsewhere. Instead, he'd welcomed her, cared for her, delivered her child. "Where will you go?" The question emerged before Theodore could stop it. "After you've recovered, I mean." Grusha's face shuddered. "I don't know. You can't walk back to the foothills with a newborn." "No," she said it flatly, as if she'd already accepted some grim reality. Theodore found himself speaking before he'd fully thought through the implications. "Stay here. Just until you're healed and the baby is strong enough to travel. I have spare rooms. It's not charity," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "I could use help around the house. I'm a terrible cook and worse at cleaning. If you're willing to help with that, we can call it even." It was a transparent lie. They both knew he was offering charity, but it was a lie that let her accept with dignity. "1 week," Grusha said. "Until I heal." 1 week, Theodore agreed, though even then, some part of him suspected it would be longer. It was. The first week passed in a blur of feedings and diaper changes, and Theodore marveling at how quickly Grusha recovered. Orc women, he learned, healed faster than humans. She was up and moving within 2 days, despite his protests. By the 4th day, she'd taken over his kitchen and produced a stew that made him nearly weep with how much better it was than his own cooking. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked, savoring another spoonful. "My mother." Grusha stirred the pot without looking at him. Before the clan cast her out for taking a human lover. The confession hung in the air between them. Theodore set down his spoon carefully. "Your father was human." "Yes." She still didn't look at him. "They said she'd poisoned the bloodline, weakened the clan. They cast us both out when I was young. We lived alone until she died when I was 15. And your husband?" Now she did look at him, and the pain in her eyes was raw, human. "From a trading post north of here. We kept the marriage secret when his town found out." She swallowed hard. "They killed him, called him a monster lover. I barely escaped." Theodore felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He'd always known prejudice existed, had seen it in small ways throughout his life. But this was different. This was murder justified by nothing but fear and hatred. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing the words were inadequate. "I'm so sorry, Grusha." She nodded stiffly and returned to stirring the pot. The conversation ended there, but something had shifted between them. A truth acknowledged, a grief shared. The 2nd week, Theodore stopped suggesting she should stay only until she healed. The 3rd week, he moved her from the spare room to the larger bedroom on the 2nd floor, the one with better light for the baby. The 4th week, someone knocked on his door while he was examining a patient, and he called out, "Mrs. Finch, could you get that?" Grusha, passing by with Zara on her hip, froze. The patient, old Mr. Brennan with his bad knee, looked confused. "Didn't know you'd remarried, Doc." Theodore opened his mouth to correct the misconception, looked at Grusha standing there with her daughter and her green skin and her golden eyes, and found himself saying instead, "Recently. Very recently." Grusha stared at him. He stared back. Neither of them corrected the lie. She answered the door. It was Mrs. Patterson, the real Mrs. Patterson, finally in labor. Theodore delivered her son that evening while Grusha waited upstairs with Zara, and when he returned home exhausted near midnight, he found dinner waiting and his not-wife asleep in the chair with their not-daughter against her chest. He should have woken her. Should have had the conversation they were avoiding. Instead, he carefully lifted Zara and carried her to the cradle, then draped a blanket over Grusha's shoulders and went to bed. The lie spread through Millbrook like wildfire. Dr. Finch had married. His wife was an orc. They had a baby girl. The reactions varied wildly. Mrs. Patterson, grateful for Theodore's care, declared that anyone who judged him wasn't worth knowing. Mr. Brennan muttered about the world going strange but kept coming for his knee treatments. The local priest, Father Matthews, showed up at Theodore's door with a pinched expression and questions about the sanctity of marriage. "Did you marry in a church?" Father Matthews demanded. Theodore, who had not in fact married anyone, found himself answering, "We had a private ceremony. Given the circumstances, we thought it best. The circumstances being that your wife is an orc. The circumstances being that we wanted privacy for a sacred moment." Theodore met the priest's eyes steadily. "Is there a church law against marrying orcs that I'm unaware of?" Father Matthews sputtered. There wasn't, because no one had ever thought to make one. Orcs and humans didn't marry. It simply wasn't done. "It's highly irregular," the priest finally managed. "So was the virgin birth, I imagine." Theodore kept his voice pleasant. "Thank you for your concern, Father, but my wife and I are quite content." The priest left, still sputtering. Grusha emerged from the kitchen where she'd been listening. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Do what? Defend me, claim me, any of it." She crossed the room to stand before him, Zara drowsing in her arms. "I can leave. Take Zara somewhere else. You don't have to pretend I'm your wife." Theodore looked at her, really looked at her. This strong, fierce woman who'd walked 3 hours in labor to save her baby. Who cooked him dinner and laughed at his terrible jokes and hummed to Zara in a language he didn't understand. Who fit into his life like a missing piece he hadn't known was absent. "What if I'm not pretending?" The words emerged quietly, but they landed with the weight of truth. Grusha went very still. What if I want you to stay? Not as a patient or a housekeeper or a temporary arrangement. Just stay as my wife if you'll have me." "Theodore." His name was barely a whisper. "You don't know what you're saying. The prejudice, the judgment, the danger. People kill for less. I know." He did know, had heard the story of her first husband, understood the risk. "I'm asking anyway." Why? It was a fair question. Theodore considered it carefully, wanting to give her honesty. "Because when I wake up, I listen for Zara crying and your footsteps in the hall. Because I find myself cooking extra so you'll have leftovers for lunch. Because yesterday I caught myself thinking about how to expand the garden so you could grow those herbs you mentioned. Because I've been alone for 2 years and I didn't realize how much I'd accepted loneliness until you filled my house with life again." He paused, then added quietly, "And because when I look at you, I don't see an orc or a patient or a charity case. I see a woman I could love if you'd let me try." Grusha's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You're a fool, probably." He smiled slightly. "Is that a no? It's a warning." She shifted Zara to one arm and reached out with the other to touch his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "I'm broken, Theodore. My first husband is dead because of me. My clan rejected me. I have nothing to offer you but problems. You have yourself. That's more than enough." He covered her hand with his own. "But I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm just asking you to consider it. Consider staying. Consider making this real instead of pretend." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, careful of her small tusks. "I'll consider it," she whispered. "But if people come with torches, I'm leaving. I won't let Zara grow up watching her parents die." "Fair enough." Though Theodore privately vowed that if anyone came with torches, they'd have to go through him first, the moment broke when Zara woke and began to fuss. Grusha pulled back, smiling slightly, and carried her daughter upstairs to nurse. Theodore stood in his empty parlor and wondered what exactly he'd just done. Proposed, apparently. To a woman he'd known for barely a month. A woman who wasn't even human. He should have felt panic. Instead, he felt something that might have been happiness stirring in his chest for the first time in years. The next few weeks tested them both. Word of Theodore's marriage spread beyond Millbrook to the surrounding towns. Some people were curious, others hostile. A group of young men from Riverdale showed up one evening, drunk and belligerent, demanding to see the monster bride. Theodore met them at the door with his rifle and a calm expression that hid his racing heart. "My wife is feeding our daughter. You're welcome to wait, but she doesn't take kindly to being called names. Neither do I." The men looked at the rifle, looked at Theodore's steady hands, and decided they had better things to do. They left with muttered slurs and threats that went nowhere. Grusha came downstairs after they'd gone, Zara asleep in her arms. "You shouldn't risk yourself for me. You're my wife." He said it firmly, and this time neither of them questioned whether he meant it. "Or you will be if you decide to stay. Either way, I'm not letting drunk idiots harass you." She set Zara in the cradle and crossed to him, taking the rifle from his shaking hands. He hadn't realized he was trembling until she touched him. "I'm deciding to stay," she said softly, in case that wasn't clear. Theodore felt something tight in his chest loosen. "Yeah? Yeah." She smiled, tusks catching the lamplight. "Though we should probably actually get married at some point, make it legal and all. Father Matthews might have strong opinions about that. Then we find someone else." Grusha set the rifle aside and took his hands in hers. "Or we do it ourselves. I don't need a church's blessing to choose you, Theodore Finch." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her broad shoulders and breathing in the scent of her hair. She smelled like the herbs she'd been drying and the soap she used, and something uniquely her. "I don't need a church's blessing to choose you either, Grusha Patterson Finch." She laughed against his chest. "That's a mouthful. You can keep your own name if you'd prefer." "No," she pulled back to look at him. "I like it. Grusha Finch, it sounds like a new start." They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other in the quiet house with Zara sleeping nearby. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of autumn. Inside, something new was growing. "We should still have a ceremony," Theodore said eventually. "Not for the church, for us." "Something that marks the moment." Grusha considered this. "In my clan, marriages were marked by exchange of gifts, something made or grown or hunted, something that showed your skills and your heart. I like that." Theodore pulled back, already thinking. "Give me a week." "For what?" "To make you a proper proposal gift. If we're doing this, I want to do it right." Her smile could have lit the whole house. "1 week then, but Theodore?" "Yes. I've already decided. Whatever you make, the answer is yes." The week that followed was controlled chaos. Theodore saw patients during the day and worked on his project at night, sending Grusha to bed early with claims of paperwork that needed finishing. She went with knowing looks but didn't question him. His project was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. But Grusha had mentioned missing her mother's garden, the herbs and flowers she'd grown before the clan cast them out. Theodore couldn't bring back her mother or erase her grief, but he could give her a place to grow things again. He built raised garden beds in the backyard, working by lantern light after Grusha slept. The wood came from old fence posts he'd been meaning to clear anyway. The design was simple but sturdy, 4 beds arranged in a square with a small bench in the center. He filled them with good soil mixed with compost from his neglected heap, then spent a full day riding to 3 different towns to find the seeds and seedlings Grusha had mentioned: sage for protection, lavender for peace, mint for healing, roses for beauty, thyme for courage. He found them all, along with a few surprises. A small pear tree sapling, because her name meant pear, and night-blooming flowers that his mother had always called moonflowers. The night before he planned to show her, Theodore stood in the garden and wondered if he'd made a mistake. It seemed presumptuous suddenly, this assumption that she'd want to stay long enough to see things grow, that she'd want to put down roots in soil that might not accept her, but he'd asked her to stay and she'd said yes. That had to count for something. He found her in the morning feeding Zara by the window, golden light streaming across her green skin and making her look almost ethereal. She glanced up when he entered, smile soft. "You're up early," she observed. "I have something to show you." He held out his hand. "Will you come with me?" Grusha's brow furrowed with curiosity, but she finished feeding Zara, settled her in the cradle, and took his hand. Theodore led her outside to the backyard, positioning her so the garden beds were in full view. She went completely still. "I know it's not much," Theodore started, suddenly nervous. "And I wasn't sure exactly what you'd want to grow, so I got a variety. The pear tree won't fruit for a few years, but I thought maybe. Well, I thought maybe we'd still be here to see it." Grusha walked forward slowly, as if in a dream. She knelt by the first bed, fingers touching the small seedlings with impossible gentleness. "You built this?" "Yes. Well, I'm a better doctor than a carpenter, so don't look too closely at the joints, but it should hold." "When?" "This week. At night after you went to bed." She moved to the next bed, then the next, examining each plant with care. When she reached the pear tree, she made a sound that might have been a sob. "Theodore." He knelt beside her, worried. "Is it too much? I'm sorry, I should have asked. I just thought." She kissed him. It was sudden and fierce and tasted like salt from tears. He hadn't realized she was crying. Theodore froze for a moment, then melted into it, one hand coming up to cup her jaw while the other steadied himself against the ground. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grusha pressed her forehead to his again. "No one has ever given me anything like this." "It's just a garden," Theodore said weakly. "It's a future." She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her green cheeks. "You planted a tree that won't fruit for years. You built beds for herbs that take seasons to mature. You're not asking me to stay for now. You're asking me to stay forever." "Yes," he said it simply, clearly. "I'm asking you to stay forever, Grusha. I'm asking you to marry me, really marry me, and build a life here, with me. If you want that, I want that." She laughed, the sound bright with joy. "I want all of that, yes. Whatever question you're asking, the answer is yes." Theodore pulled a small box from his pocket, the one piece of his project he hadn't shown her yet. Inside was a ring, simple silver with a small green stone he'd found at the jeweler's in Riverside. "It's aventurine," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "The jeweler said it represents growth and new beginnings. I thought that seemed appropriate." Grusha stared at the ring, then at him, then started laughing and crying at the same time. "You impossible, wonderful fool, I have nothing to give you in return. You have yourself. That's all I want." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise instead of a discovery. They stayed like that for a while, kneeling in the dirt between garden beds, holding each other as the morning sun climbed higher. Eventually, Zara's cry from inside reminded them of the world beyond this moment. "We should probably make this legal," Theodore said as they stood, brushing dirt from their knees, "before the whole town shows up to object." "Tomorrow," Grusha decided. "We'll find someone tomorrow. Today I just want to be with you. No witnesses, no church, just us. So they spent the day together, the three of them. Theodore closed his practice and put a sign on the door, "Family Emergency." They walked to the creek beyond town where Grusha had never been, where the water ran clear and cold and the trees grew thick enough to hide them from judgmental eyes. Theodore waded into the shallows with his pants rolled up, while Grusha sat on the bank with Zara, laughing at his attempts to catch fish with his bare hands. He failed spectacularly, slipping on rocks and scaring more fish than he caught, but Grusha's laughter made it worth every soaking. "Your husband was probably better at this," Theodore panted, wringing out his shirt. The laughter faded from Grusha's face, but not entirely. Marcus never tried. He was a clerk, not a hunter. He could barely start a fire without help. It was the first time she'd spoken her first husband's name aloud. Theodore waded back to shore and sat beside her, water dripping into the grass. "You loved him." "I did." She said it without shame or apology. "Not the way I love you, but yes, he was kind and gentle, and he died because of me." "He died because some people are monsters, and it has nothing to do with what species they are." Theodore took her hand, the one with the ring. "You're allowed to have loved him and still love me. There's no competition there. He was part of your life, part of what made you who you are." "I'm grateful for that." Grusha turned to look at him, golden eyes searching. "How are you real?" "I'm not sure I am sometimes. You might have hit your head during labor, and all of this is a very detailed hallucination." She laughed and shoved him lightly, nearly sending him tumbling back into the water. They ended up wrestling, careful not to disturb Zara sleeping beside them, until they were both breathless and grass-stained and happy in a way Theodore hadn't been in years. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they walked back to town. They didn't hide, didn't sneak through back alleys. They walked down the main street, Grusha with Zara in her arms and Theodore with his hand on the small of her back, and dared anyone to say something. A few people stared. Mrs. Patterson waved cheerfully from her bakery. Mr. Brennan nodded respectfully. Father Matthews watched from his church steps with an expression somewhere between disapproval and confusion. They ignored them all and went home. That night, after Zara was asleep and the house was quiet, Theodore and Grusha stood in the garden beneath the stars. They decided not to wait for legal documents or official ceremonies. This moment was theirs alone. "In my clan," Grusha said softly, "marriages were witnessed by the earth and sky, no priest needed, just two people making promises they intended to keep." "That sounds perfect." Theodore took both her hands in his. "What do we say, the truth?" She squeezed his fingers. "I promise to stand with you as long as I live, to tend your wounds and share your burdens, to grow with you like these plants we've set in soil, to be your partner in all things." Theodore felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I promise to stand with you as long as I live. To honor your strength and shelter your heart, to plant futures with you and watch them bloom, to be your partner in all things." They stood there for a moment, just breathing together beneath the stars. Then Grusha said, "In my clan, the marriage is sealed with blood. A small cut mixed together to show the joining of lives. I have a better idea." Theodore pulled her close and kissed her, deep and slow and full of promise. When they broke apart, he whispered against her lips, "How's that for sealing it?" "Much better than blood," Grusha agreed, and kissed him again. They stayed in the garden until the moon rose high, talking about futures and plans and the thousand small details of building a life together. Where to expand the house when Zara got older. What vegetables to plant in spring. Whether they should get chickens or if that was asking for trouble. Normal things. Domestic things. The kind of things that meant forever. The legal marriage took longer to arrange. Father Matthews refused to perform the ceremony, which surprised exactly no one. Instead, they rode 2 towns over to Riverdale, where a retired judge named Harrison agreed to do the honors, though he made it clear he thought the whole thing highly irregular. "You understand this won't be recognized everywhere," Judge Harrison warned. "Some places have laws against interspecies marriage. Then we'll stay in places that don't," Theodore said simply, holding Grusha's hand. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike. They exchanged vows in the judge's parlor with his wife and adult daughter as witnesses. The daughter kept staring at Grusha with wide eyes, though whether from fascination or fear, Theodore couldn't tell. When it was done, Judge Harrison handed them a marriage certificate with visible reluctance. "You're legal now for whatever that's worth. I hope you know what you're doing, son." "I do," Theodore said, and meant it. They rode home as husband and wife, Zara drowsing in a carrier against Grusha's chest. It should have felt different, Theodore thought, more momentous somehow. Instead, it felt like they'd simply made official what had already been true for weeks. "Disappointed?" Grusha asked, as if reading his thoughts. "Not even a little bit. You?" "No," she smiled at him, tusks catching the afternoon light. "Though I'm glad we did the garden ceremony first. That felt more real. We can have another ceremony whenever you want, make a tradition of it. Get married every year. I think once is enough." But she was laughing, and Theodore felt his heart swell with love for this woman who'd stumbled into his life and claimed it as her own. The trouble started 3 months later, in the dead of winter when the roads were frozen and travel was difficult. Theodore was treating a patient, young Tommy Brennan with a broken arm from sliding on ice, when he heard shouting outside. "Stay here," he told Tommy and his mother, then went to investigate. A group of men stood in the street, maybe 15 of them, armed with clubs and torches despite the daylight. Theodore recognized a few faces from neighboring towns. The rest were strangers. "Dr. Finch," the leader called out. He was a big man with a scar across his jaw and eyes hard as flint. "We need to talk." "About what?" Theodore kept his voice level, aware of Grusha upstairs with Zara. "About you harboring a monster. We've been patient, let you have your fun, but this has gone on long enough. Hand over the orc and we'll leave peacefully." Theodore felt cold fury settle in his gut. "That's my wife you're talking about. She's not going anywhere. Your wife." The man spat the words like a curse. "You're an abomination, both of you, lying with a monster, raising a half-breed. It's unnatural. What's unnatural is you showing up at my home making threats." Theodore took a step forward, placing himself between the men and his front door. "Leave, now, before I get the sheriff." "Sheriff won't help you. Half the town agrees with us, even if they're too cowardly to say so." The leader hefted his club. "Last chance, doctor. Hand over the orc or we'll take her by force." Theodore heard the upstairs window open. Before he could shout a warning, Grusha appeared on the roof, having climbed out with Zara strapped to her back. She held Theodore's rifle, and from the way she aimed it, she knew how to use it. "You want me," she called down. "Come and get me. But the first man who touches my husband or my daughter dies. That's a promise." The men shifted uneasily. A woman with a gun was dangerous. An orc woman was terrifying. An orc woman protecting her child was nightmare fuel. "You can't fight all of us," the leader said, but his confidence had wavered. "Maybe not." Grusha's aim never wavered. "But I can definitely fight you, and you'll be dead before your friends reach my family." Theodore felt a surge of love and terror. She was magnificent and completely insane and going to get herself killed. "Grusha, get down from there. Not until they leave." Her voice was steel. The standoff might have ended badly if not for Mrs. Patterson. She came out of her bakery with her own rifle, ancient and probably hadn't been fired in 20 years, but she pointed it at the mob with steady hands. "I think you boys should listen to the lady," Mrs. Patterson said calmly. "Dr. Finch delivered my son. His wife makes the best bread I've ever tasted. You're not touching either of them." Mr. Brennan emerged from Theodore's house, his bad knee apparently forgotten, with a pistol that looked older than he was. "My grandson's inside with a broken arm. You want to threaten the doctor treating him? You'll have to go through me first." One by one, townspeople emerged, not all of them, not even most. But enough. The blacksmith with his hammer, the school teacher with her husband, even old Mrs. Chen from the general store, tiny and fierce with a meat cleaver. The mob leader looked around, calculating odds that had suddenly shifted. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Monsters don't belong here, we'll be back." "If you do, I'll be ready," Grusha called down. "And next time I won't bother with warnings." The men left, muttering threats and promises of retribution that faded as they disappeared down the road. Theodore waited until they were completely out of sight before turning to the people who defended them. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "All of you, I won't forget this." Mrs. Patterson lowered her rifle. "You're one of us, Doc, both of you are. Those outsiders don't get to tell us who belongs in our town." The others nodded agreement and slowly dispersed, returning to their shops and homes. Theodore stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. His town had chosen them, not unanimously but enough. "Theodore," Grusha called from above. "I think I'm stuck." He looked up to find her straddling the roof peak, Zara on her back and the rifle balanced precariously across her knees. Despite everything, he started laughing. "How exactly did you get up there?" "Climbing. Getting down seems harder. Stay there. I'll get a ladder." He retrieved the ladder from the shed and helped her down, taking Zara first and then guiding Grusha as she climbed backward. When she finally touched ground, he pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he said into her hair. "I thought you were going to get yourself killed. I thought they were going to hurt you." She held him just as tightly. "I couldn't let that happen. We need to talk about your definition of safe responses to danger." "My definition is fine. You're alive, aren't you?" He pulled back to look at her, this fierce, impossible woman he'd married. "Promise me something." "What?" "If something like this happens again, we face it together. No more dramatic roof climbs with our daughter strapped to your back." Grusha considered this. "I promise to try. But if someone threatens you or Zara, all bets are off." It was the best he was going to get. So Theodore kissed her and tried not to think about what might have happened if the townspeople hadn't shown up. Tried not to think about the mob leader's promise to return. That night, they had a difficult conversation about safety and futures and whether they should leave Millbrook for somewhere less hostile. Theodore argued for staying. This was his home, his practice. The people who mattered had stood with them. Grusha argued for leaving. One successful defense didn't mean they were safe. The mob had been surprised, unprepared for resistance. Next time they'd come with more men and more weapons. "I won't run again," Theodore said firmly. "I ran after my wife died, came here to escape memories. I'm not running from my life a second time. I'm not asking you to run, I'm asking you to survive." Grusha paced the kitchen, agitated. "You're human, Theodore. You could claim I forced you, tell them you were coerced. They'd accept that, you could live peacefully. Without you, without Zara." "That's not living, that's existing." He caught her hand, stopping her pacing. "We stay, we build our life, we face whatever comes together." "You're a fool. You've mentioned that before. Your point," she laughed despite herself, tension breaking slightly. "My point is that I love you too much to watch you die for me. Then we'll have to make sure neither of us dies." Theodore pulled her close. "Besides, I have a secret weapon." "What's that?" "You on a roof, with a rifle, apparently you're terrifying." "I've had practice." Grew up hunting in orc lands. We needed to eat. She rested her head against his chest. I'm serious though, Theodore. This won't be the last time, and eventually we might not win. I know. He said it quietly, honestly. But I'd rather live 1 year with you in danger than 50 years safe and alone. Call me selfish, but that's the truth. Grusha was quiet for a long moment. Then, 1 year might be all we get. Then we make it a good year. They held each other in the quiet kitchen, listening to Zara's soft breathing from her cradle in the next room. Outside, winter wind rattled the windows. Inside, they built plans for survival. Spring came with mud and hope in equal measure. Grusha's garden began to sprout, tiny green shoots pushing through dark soil. The pear tree budded but didn't bloom, too young yet for flowers. Theodore expanded his practice, seeing patients from further away as word spread that he didn't discriminate in his care. Some people came specifically because they'd heard about his orc wife and were curious. Others came despite it, needing medicine badly enough to overcome their prejudice. Theodore treated them all the same and sent them home with salves and tinctures and instructions Grusha had helped prepare. She'd proven remarkably knowledgeable about herbs and medicine, teaching him remedies from orc tradition that worked as well or better than his textbook solutions. They became a team, Theodore handling surgeries and acute care, while Grusha managed the herbal preparations and gentle healing. Zara grew fat and happy, her tusks more pronounced now, her skin settling into a pale green that fell somewhere between her mother's deeper tone and her late father's human coloring. She was a beautiful baby, and Theodore loved her as fiercely as if she'd been his blood. "You're good with her," Grusha observed one evening, watching him play with Zara on the floor. "Natural. I've delivered enough babies to know which end is up." He lifted Zara above his head, making her squeal with delight. "Though I admit, I didn't expect to enjoy parenthood this much. My first wife and I tried for years. It never happened. I'm sorry, don't be. If it had, I wouldn't have this." He brought Zara down to rest on his chest, her small hands gripping his shirt. "I think maybe things work out the way they're supposed to." That's a very optimistic view for someone who had a mob at his door 3 months ago. The mob left. We're still here. I count that as a win. He grinned at her. "Besides, I have you to protect me. What could go wrong? Don't tempt fate," Grusha warned, but she was smiling. Fate, as it turned out, had a sense of humor. The mob leader returned in early summer with twice as many men, and a determination that bordered on fanaticism. They came at night this time, surrounding the house while Theodore and Grusha slept. Theodore woke to the smell of smoke. He bolted upright, instantly alert, and found Grusha already at the window with Zara in her arms and the rifle in her hand. "They're burning the garden," she said flatly. "All of it. The beds, the pear tree, everything." Theodore felt rage surge through him, hot and cleansing. He pulled on pants and boots, grabbed his pistol from the drawer, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Grusha demanded. "To stop them." "Theodore, there are dozens of them." "I don't care." He turned to look at her, this woman he loved more than safety or sense. "They can threaten me. They can threaten us. But that garden was my promise to you, our future. I'm not letting them burn it without a fight." He was out the door before she could argue. The heat hit him first, flames already consuming the garden beds and licking at the pear tree. Men stood around the perimeter with torches and weapons, backlit by fire like demons from hell. The mob leader stepped forward, that same scarred face twisted with hatred. "Going to watch this time, doctor? Watch your unnatural life burn." Theodore raised his pistol. "I'm going to give you one chance to put those torches out and leave. After that, I start shooting. 1 man against 40. You're as stupid as you are perverted. Then I'll die stupid." Theodore's hand was steady, years of surgical precision serving him well. But I'll take you with me. That's a promise. The leader laughed, but something in Theodore's eyes must have convinced him because he stopped advancing. You'd really die for a monster and some plants, without hesitation. Theodore stepped closer to the flames, feeling the heat scorch his skin. That monster is my wife. Those plants are our future. You want to take them, you'll have to kill me first. That can be arranged. The voice came from behind him. Theodore spun to find 3 men emerging from the smoke, clubs raised. He got one shot off before they reached him, saw the leftmost man go down clutching his shoulder. Then something hit his head and the world tilted sideways. He heard Grusha scream his name, heard Zara crying, heard the roar of flames and the laughter of men who thought they'd won. Then he heard something else, hoofbeats. Lots of them. Theodore forced his eyes open through the blood running down his face. Through the smoke and fire he saw riders approaching. 20, maybe 30 of them, armed and moving fast. The mob saw them too. Their laughter died. The leader shouted orders to retreat, but it was too late. The riders surrounded them, cutting off escape routes. A woman dismounted, tall and broad-shouldered with skin the deep green of oak leaves and tusks that could gore a man. She wore armor pieced together from leather and metal, clearly functional rather than decorative. An orc warrior. "Which one of you is Theodore Finch?" she demanded, her voice carrying across the chaos. Theodore tried to raise his hand, but the world was spinning too much. Instead, he managed a weak, "Here." The orc woman crossed to him in 3 strides, kneeling to examine his head wound with surprisingly gentle hands. "You're bleeding badly. Can you walk?" "Maybe. Who are you?" "Mara. I'm Grusha's cousin." She helped him to his feet, supporting his weight easily. She sent word months ago that she'd found sanctuary in a human town. When we heard about the mob, we rode south. Looks like we arrived just in time. Grusha has family. Theodore blinked through the blood, trying to process this. She said her clan cast her out. They cast out her mother. The younger generation doesn't honor that exile. Mara guided him toward the house, barking orders to her warriors in a language Theodore didn't understand. "Now let's get you inside before you bleed out. Grusha will kill me if I let her husband die." The next few hours were chaos. Mara's warriors rounded up the mob, disarming them and binding those who resisted. The flames were extinguished, though not before the garden suffered heavy damage. Inside the house, Grusha worked on Theodore's head wound while Zara cried in a cradle watched over by a young orc warrior who looked barely old enough to hold a sword. "You're an idiot," Grusha said as she stitched his scalp. Her hands were steady but her voice shook. "Confronting 40 men with 1 pistol, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking they were burning our future." Theodore winced as the needle pierced skin. "And I was right. Look at the garden. Gardens can be replanted. You can't." She tied off the stitch with more force than necessary. "If Mara hadn't arrived when she did, you'd be dead. But she did arrive, and I'm not dead, so we're fine." "Fine. Theodore, you have a concussion and a head wound that took 15 stitches. That's not fine." He caught her hand, stopping her from preparing another suture. "We're alive, together." "That's fine enough for me." Grusha's eyes filled with tears. She set down her tools and very carefully hugged him, mindful of his injuries. "Don't do that again, please. I can't lose you too." "I'll try." He held her as tightly as his aching head allowed. "But if someone threatens our family again, I'm not making any promises." She laughed wetly against his shoulder. "You really are a fool. You're fool, though." "Yes, my fool." The mob was dealt with swiftly. Mara's warriors hauled them before the sheriff, who'd conveniently been in the next town over when the attack happened. Confronted with evidence and angry orc warriors, he suddenly found his sense of justice and arrested the lot of them. The mob leader, whose name turned out to be Garrett Walsh, was charged with arson and attempted murder. He'd spend the next 10 years in prison, assuming he survived that long. The others received lesser sentences, but enough to make them think twice about future violence. "We'll stay for a few weeks," Mara told Theodore as he recovered. "Make sure there are no more attacks. After that, you're on your own. Think you can manage? We've managed so far." Theodore looked around his house, now filled with orc warriors preparing meals and checking weapons. It was surreal. "Thank you, by the way, for coming, for saving us," thanked Grusha. "She's the one who kept writing, telling us about her new life, about the human doctor who married her and loved her daughter." Mara smiled, her tusks catching the light. "She's family. We don't abandon family." Even when her mother was cast out. That was the old generation's mistake. We're trying to do better. Mara settled into a chair across from him, studying his face. "You love her, genuinely. More than anything. Good, because if you ever hurt her, I'll ride back down here and gut you myself." "Understood," Theodore nodded solemnly. "Understood. Though in fairness, she's more likely to hurt me. Did you see her on the roof with the rifle?" Mara laughed. "I taught her to shoot when we were young. She always was fierce." Her expression sobered. "Her first husband wasn't a bad man, but he was weak. Let his people kill him rather than fight for her. I'm glad she found someone with more spine." "I don't feel particularly spiny," Theodore admitted. "I feel terrified most of the time. Being brave means being terrified and fighting anyway." "You did that. You're still doing it." Mara stood, preparing to leave. "That's all anyone can ask." The warriors stayed for 3 weeks, helping rebuild the garden and standing guard against any further attacks. None came. Apparently, word had spread that the orc doctor's wife had powerful family, and threatening her meant facing an entire warrior clan. When Mara and her warriors finally left, Grusha cried for an hour. Theodore held her, understanding that these tears were about more than just saying goodbye. They were about having had family again, even briefly, about not being alone in the world. "They'll visit," he promised, "whenever they can, and we can visit them. With a baby, through the mountains. Zara won't be a baby forever, and yes, through the mountains. I want to see where you grew up. Meet more of your family, if they'll have me." Grusha pulled back to look at him, tusks catching on a smile. "They already adore you. Mara told me you talked to the young warriors about medicine, taught them how to treat wounds properly. They were impressed. I'm a doctor. Teaching is part of the job." He wiped tears from her green cheeks. "Besides, they're your family. That makes them my family. I want to know them. They spent the summer rebuilding. The garden beds were repaired, new plants installed. The pear tree had survived, scorched but alive, and by autumn it had pushed out new growth." Theodore took it as a sign. Patients continued to come, some from further away now that word had spread about the doctor who'd stood up to a mob for his orc wife. Apparently that kind of loyalty inspired trust. Theodore's practice grew, and with it, their stability. Zara took her first steps in the garden, wobbling between the raised beds while Grusha hovered anxiously, and Theodore stood ready to catch her. She fell more than she walked, but her determination was absolute, just like her mother. "She's going to be trouble," Theodore observed as Zara pulled herself up on the pear tree and tried to climb. "Good." Grusha scooped up her daughter before she could fall. "The world needs more trouble from strong women." Life settled into a rhythm. Seasons passed. The pear tree grew taller, stronger. Zara learned to talk, her first words a mix of common tongue and the orc language Grusha taught her. Theodore's practice flourished. Grusha's garden produced enough herbs to supply 3 towns. They had arguments, of course. Grusha thought Theodore took too many risks with difficult patients. Theodore thought Grusha was too protective of Zara. They disagreed about money and meals and whether they needed a bigger house. But they never disagreed about the important things. They loved each other. They'd chosen this life. They'd keep choosing it every day, no matter what came. 2 years after their wedding, on the anniversary of the day Grusha had first stumbled through Theodore's door, he took her to the garden. The pear tree had finally fruited, small green pears hanging heavy from its branches. "Look at that," Theodore said softly. "We made it to the harvest." Grusha touched one of the pears gently. "We did. I have something for you." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I wasn't sure when to give it to you, but this seemed like the right moment." Grusha unfolded it carefully. It was the marriage certificate from Judge Harrison, but Theodore had written something at the bottom in careful script. 2 years married. A lifetime to go. All my love, Theodore. "You're sentimental," she said, but her voice was thick with emotion. "Only with you." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Finch. Happy anniversary, husband." She turned in his arms to kiss him, deep and slow and full of promise. "Thank you for not correcting me." "What?" "That first day. When you called me Mrs. Patterson, I should have corrected you, but I was so desperate for help, for someone to treat me like a person instead of a monster. And then you kept calling me that, and I kept not correcting you, and somewhere along the way it became true." Theodore laughed. "I thought you just didn't want to embarrass me for mixing you up with the baker's wife." "That too," she grinned at him. "We're both fools, it turns out." "The best kind." He kissed her again. "Come on, let's pick some pears and make something sweet. I think we've earned it." They spent the afternoon harvesting fruit and baking, Zara helping by making a mess and stealing raw dough when they weren't looking. The house filled with the scent of pears and cinnamon and the sound of Zara's laughter. That evening they ate pear pie on the back porch while the sun set in shades of gold and amber. Zara sat between them, sticky with pie filling and happy as only a child could be. In the distance, the mountains rose dark against the sky, the same mountains that separated Grusha's old life from her new one. "You ever regret it?" Theodore asked quietly. "Everything you gave up to be here." Grusha considered the question seriously. "I regret that Marcus died. I regret that my mother never got to see me happy. I regret the years I spent alone and afraid." She looked at him, golden eyes soft in the fading light. "But I don't regret finding you. I don't regret this life. Even with the danger and the prejudice and the mobs, I'd choose this every time." "Good." Theodore took her hand, the one with the aventurine ring. "Because I'd choose you every time, too." They sat like that as darkness fell, watching stars emerge one by one. Inside the house, their life waited. Theodore's medical journals and Grusha's herb preparations. Zara's toys scattered across the floor. The bed they shared. The future they were building together one day at a time. It wasn't an easy life. The prejudice didn't vanish, and there were still people who looked at them with hatred or disgust. But there were also people like Mrs. Patterson who brought them bread every Sunday. Like Mr. Brennan who helped repair their fence. Like Mara and her warriors who'd ridden through the night to save them. The good didn't erase the bad, but it balanced it, made it bearable, made it worth fighting for. Years passed. Zara grew into a strong, fierce girl who could track game like her mother and set bones like her father. Theodore's hair went gray at the temples. Grusha's tusks grew longer, more pronounced. The pear tree became massive, producing fruit that people came from 3 towns over to buy. They expanded the house, adding rooms for the children that followed. Not biological children, but ones who needed them. An orc boy whose parents died in a raid. A human girl abandoned for having pointed ears and green-tinted skin, evidence of mixed heritage her parents couldn't accept. A half-orc teenager who'd been beaten and cast out. Theodore and Grusha took them all in. built them a family out of love and determination and sheer, stubborn refusal to let the world's cruelty win. Their home became a sanctuary for anyone who didn't fit, who'd been rejected, who needed proof that different kinds of people could build something beautiful together. It wasn't the life Theodore had imagined when he'd first opened his practice in Millbrook. It was better. Harder, messier, more complicated, but infinitely better. On their 10th anniversary, Theodore took Grusha back to the garden. The pear tree had grown massive, its branches spreading wide enough to shade half the yard. Their children played nearby, a mix of species and ages, all of them safe and loved. "Remember when you stumbled through my door bleeding and terrified?" Theodore asked, holding Grusha close. "Every day." She rested her head on his shoulder. "I thought I was going to die. Thought Zara was going to die. Then you called me Mrs. Patterson and everything changed. I still don't know why I did that. Just got confused, I suppose. I know why I didn't correct you." Grusha turned to look at him, tusks catching the afternoon light. "Because for the first time since Marcus died, someone looked at me and saw a person. A wife. Not a monster or a problem or a curiosity. Just a woman who needed help. And you kept seeing me that way even after you realized your mistake. So I let you keep calling me that name, and I let myself hope that maybe it could be true." Theodore felt his eyes sting with tears. Even after 10 years, she could still undo him with her honesty. "It was true from the moment you decided to stay." "No." She touched his face gently. "It was true from the moment you asked me to." They kissed beneath the pear tree they'd planted together, surrounded by the family they'd built and the life they'd chosen. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magic, no easy answers, no guarantee that everything would work out, but it was real. And it was theirs. And that was more than enough. Zara called out that dinner was ready, her voice carrying across the yard. The other children echoed her, a chorus of different tones and accents. Theodore and Grusha walked hand in hand toward their home, toward their family, toward the future they'd build together. The town had changed around them over the years. More mixed families had moved in, finding sanctuary in a place that had defended an orc doctor's wife against a mob. Millbrook became known as a safe haven, a place where species didn't matter as much as character. Not everyone approved. There were still those who muttered about declining standards and unnatural relationships. But they were outnumbered now by people who'd learned that love was love, family was family, and kindness mattered more than the color of someone's skin. Theodore retired from active practice when his hands grew too unsteady for surgery. He trained successors, both human and orc, passing on everything he'd learned. Grusha took over most of the herbal medicine work, her reputation spreading until people came from days away to consult with her. They grew old together, watching their children grow and have children of their own. The house expanded again, adding a wing for when grandchildren visited. The garden grew wild and beautiful, tended by many hands. On their 20th anniversary, Theodore woke to find Grusha already up, standing in the garden with her hands on the pear tree. He joined her, moving slower now, his bones aching with age. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That first day. How close I came to not knocking on your door. I almost kept walking, almost bled out in the woods alone rather than risk rejection again." She turned to him, and despite the gray in her hair and the lines on her face, her eyes were still that same brilliant gold. "I'm glad I was too desperate to give up. I'm glad you were too stubborn to die." Theodore wrapped his arms around her, fitting together like puzzle pieces after 20 years of practice. "Best mistake I ever made, thinking you were someone else. Best lie I ever told, letting you think it." They stood there as the sun rose, painting the world in shades of pink and gold. Inside the house, their family slept. In the town beyond, life moved forward, and in this garden they'd planted together, fruit hung heavy on branches, promising sweetness for years to come. It was, Theodore thought, exactly the kind of happily ever after he'd never dared to dream of. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth every moment of difficulty. Not what he'd expected, but everything he'd needed. And it had all started because a desperate orc woman stumbled through his door and he'd been too confused to realize she wasn't who he thought she was. Or maybe, some part of him suggested, he'd known exactly who she was from the start, his wife, his partner, his future, the woman who'd taught him that love transcended species and prejudice and fear. That family was built, not born. That the best things in life came from the courage to choose them, even when the world said you shouldn't. Theodore looked at Grusha, this fierce green woman who'd claimed his heart without trying, and smiled. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what? For not correcting me. For staying. For building this life with me. For everything." Grusha smiled back, tusks catching the morning light. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay. For seeing me when everyone else saw a monster. For loving our daughter. For being exactly the fool I needed." They kissed, slow and sweet, then walked back to the house hand in hand. Behind them, the pear tree stood tall and strong, roots deep in soil they'd tended together for 20 years. It would stand for years more, a living monument to the day a doctor assumed a pregnant orc was his wife, and neither of them ever corrected him. A testament to the life they'd built from that simple confusion, and every year without fail it would fruit, sweet and perfect. Just like the love that had planted it.